everybody. This is the Nitty Gritty. My name is Chad. With me is Leonard. And I think the WrestleMania card, Leonard, is starting to take shape, at least a little bit. As we record this, nothing has happened with Cody Rhodes. That was a lot of fun to do that episode.
Yes.
That was more current events in wrestling. This week, we are going to be tackling the many gimmicks of Edward Harrison Leslie. How about that, Leonard? Bet you didn't know his middle name.
I did not know his middle name was Harrison. That is a great middle name for Ed Leslie.
It is. And we are going to be ranking his gimmicks. Now, there might be some gimmicks that are not listed, as a few of them could probably be looped together, where there were slight name changes maybe. We'll get to that. He was born April 21st, 1957, and he is billed from San Francisco, California. He's also been billed from parts unknown. And my favorite, the land of yin and yang, which I really feel is a location that should be used more often today. That's just my opinion, and I'm sticking to it.
Jimmy Wang Yang should have been from there.
That's, yeah, population of 2. Mm-hmm. So, yes, obviously, we know that Ed Leslie is most famously known as Brutus the Barber Beefcake. I'm sure that will be near the top of both of our lists, but who knows? Maybe Leonard and I will be a little bit different. Actually, I'm pretty positive Leonard and I will be a little bit different here. But anyway, he got his career started in 1977, and I'm not going to tell you what the gimmick is because one of those gimmicks is on our list, right, Leonard?
Right, or a combo package of.
So, Leonard, why don't you tell us every gimmick that we're going to be talking about here?
Okay, so in vague chronological order, from 1977 to 1984, he wrestled in a variety of territories and was often paired up with Hulk Hogan as his brother. So he had several names during this period: Eddie Boulder, Dizzy Hogan, Dizzy Golden, Eddie Golden, any combination of those words. And since it was pretty much the same character, just with a different name, we just kind of grouped those together as the early years of Ed Leslie.
Right.
Then from 1984 to 1987, he was part of the Dream Team in the WWF. So we called this Dream Team Brutus Beefcake. Then from 1987 to 1990, and again from 91 to 93, is Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Of course, that was the barber gimmick where he would cut the hair of jobbers after putting them out with a sleeper hold. In 1990, he suffered a very infamous parasailing accident, which destroyed his face. And in early 1991, he came back as the Mariner under a mask, had 2 run-ins, and they abandoned the idea. Then he, again, came back, wasn't really wrestling much from 91 to 93, pretty much hosting the barbershop. But in early 93, he would reteam with Hulk Hogan to form the Mega Maniacs WrestleMania 9. And at that time, Hogan was calling him Brother Brutai, sort of as a nickname. But that name kind of stuck. So when they both went to WCW in 1994, and they couldn't call him Bruce the Barber Beefcake for copyright reasons, he was originally known as Brother Brutai. And then later in 94, he was known as the Clip Master, kind of a generic version of the barber gimmick. And then he turned on Hulk Hogan, became the Butcher. That was late in 94. When he couldn't get the job done against Hogan, Kevin Sullivan kicked him out of the Dungeon of Doom. And in early 95, he was known briefly as the Man with No Face or the Man with No Name. Disappeared, came back in mid-95 as the Zodiac, a member of the Dungeon of Doom. Eventually, it would be revealed that he was a secret agent for Hulk Hogan inside the Dungeon of Doom the entire time. And in 1996, it would become the Booty Man and would be paired with the Booty Babe, Kimberly Page. Would go away at the start of the NWO. He would get beat down by the NWO, disappear, come back, and in 98 to 99 would wrestle as the Disciple. After, from 2000 on, he wrestled occasionally. He still appears on the convention circuit. I believe, as Chad mentioned, signing autographs, taking pictures with fans. There were 2 other names / gimmicks that we ran across that we didn't find out a lot of information about. One was Baron Beefcake, and the other was Brute Force.
Yeah.
So we did not include those. I think both those might have been random gimmicks after his semi-retirement around 2000. So,
well, actually, from what
yeah.
from what I saw, those at Gimmicks actually occurred right before. At least it seems that it was right before his, or maybe at the beginning of his debut in WWF.
Oh, okay. Well, then I was incorrect.
And yeah, like, so he was all those gimmicks with Hogan, associated with Hogan. And then when Hogan left for WWF, it seemed like wherever he was, maybe he was shortly known as Brute Force and maybe Baron Beefcake. But yeah, the timeline on those is fuzzy, which is why they won't be here. And you know what's funny about this topic, Leonard, and it was fun to compile this list, but I was kind of surprised at how much I didn't know. Like some of these gimmicks I had not heard of. I had not heard of, like the obvious ones I've heard of, and we'll get to all those. But this was interesting in that there were gimmicks during periods I was actively watching wrestling that I legit do not remember in any way, shape, or form. But we will get there. And you know what? That's going to lead in. I'll just start to my number 11 pick, which is the Mariner, which also, like, that, I guess, was dubbed the name down the road later on. But I guess at the time he was unofficially known as Furface for whatever reason. There are clips of him as the Mariner dressed in, like, some weird garb and a mask, and it didn't make any sense. The commentary team didn't seem to understand it at all. Vince was one of them, and it was probably his idea, if not part his idea, and he seemed to be confused. So yeah, like, this was what I was talking about. Like, I was actively watching wrestling at this point, and I do not remember him coming in as the Mariner. I just don't, not at all. And like, I feel like I was watching every week at this point. So he would come in and he would attack some heels. There's a clip of him attacking Earthquake, and
I believe Rick Martel's the other one.
What's that?
I think Rick Martel was the other heel he attacked.
Right. And I guess I don't know if they were planning on this being an actual gimmick, if they were just giving him some work to do while he healed. It's really tough to say. Like, this is one of those random questions where if you had a podcast with Vince, you might ask him this at some point. But yeah, so my number 11 is the Mariner. How about you, Leonard?
It is also my number 11 for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. I don't remember it from the time, but I remember it from after, because at the early days of the internet and WrestleCrap, when people would say, oh, name the worst gimmick, name the most short-lived gimmick, the Mariner would often come up. Again, also known as Furface. It was only like 2 appearances, right, at least on television, that we know of. You also have to ask, what was even the idea here? He's wearing a mask with a star on the side that looks like your grandma knitted it the night before you needed it for a school play. Forgot to tell anybody.
Stardust grandfather.
Yes. And yeah, maybe that's who he is. And he's wearing, there's one picture, which I'm sure you'll throw this picture up. He's wearing like a metal basket around his neck. Like he's going to go fry some fish at Long John Silver's. Maybe that's why he's the Mariner, because he's frying fish in the basket around his neck. I don't know. Yeah. My guess here is it was a little bit of Ed Leslie wanting to work and WWF wanting to find something for him to do.
I wonder if, like, he called Vince when Vince was out drunk one night at, like, the local steakhouse that he likes to frequent.
Yes.
And Ed Leslie was like, I'm healed. I can go. Like, give me some work. Or, all right, you're going to be the Mariner. It's like, otherwise, I don't know how or why. Maybe it was a group of them that were under the influence. Who knows? Bruce Prichard
was sitting there eating a shrimp basket. That's what gave him the idea. He was eating a shrimp basket. And went, right. You're going to be the Mariner.
All right. Well, my number 10 pick is going to be the Clip Master. And this was post Brother Brutai, right, Leonard?
Yes. Right. This was very short. And I'll just jump in here. The Clip Master was also my number 10.
Wow.
And this is one I absolutely do not remember at all. I was watching it at this time. I don't think it was very long, but from what I understand, it was just WCW trying to recreate the Barber gimmick, but not being able to call him the Barber. But I've never heard of a barber called a Clip Master.
Oh, that's the thing. So, like, while we were talking, while you were doing the intro there, I was thinking to myself, like, what would have been really creative, much more creative than WCW was capable at the time. No offense to any of the legends that were there on the booking committee, but if you could have called him the Clip Master and have him do this promo where people assume that it means he cuts hair, he's like, no, I'm the Clip Master because I like to create really memorable clips in the ring. Something stupid like a play on words, or like have fun with it. Maybe, I don't know. Like, I feel like I could have spun that to Dusty or Rick or whoever was booking at that time, and they would have been like, no thanks, go home. But hey, I think my idea is better still.
I thought it sounded like a Marvel villain with a football gimmick. He's clipping people in the back of the knees, the Clip Master. It would have been one of those old Marvel 2-in-1s from the 70s.
Right.
Like, I know that there's a chain of salons called Great Clips. There's one called Master Cuts. Maybe they took them together and made the Clip Master.
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. And again, when we talk about WCW, lazy booking, uncreative ideas, it was like, how can we recreate the Barber? And they do it in like the dumbest way possible.
And avoid the, trademark or copyright infringement laws that WWE obviously would have gone forward with. This is just one of those examples of people looking back at WCW and kind of rolling their eyes because there's just no thought that went into this. It was just, we need to remind people that he is a friend of Hogan. People know that. Like, you didn't have to treat wrestling fans like they were complete morons. I think that, I wonder though, if this was a Hogan idea. Like, part of me, for whatever reason, like, Brutus was like, what do I call myself? Everybody knows me as the Barber, or just call yourself the Clip Master or something. Anyway, my number 9 pick is the Man with No Name and the Man with No Face, a twofer there. So this minor gimmick occurred after he was booted from the Three Faces of Fear. He was, and had amnesia and was then dubbed the Man with No Name. I don't know. I assume it was after that they referred to him as the Man with No Face. I did find a match with him and Kevin Sullivan, assuming this was right after he got booted from the Three Faces of Fear, where they introduced him as the Man with No Name. I didn't find any clips of him as the Man with No Face. But this is just about as dumb as it gets. I didn't realize WCW did multiple amnesia gimmicks. They did one famously with Cactus Jack that also is not remembered fondly. But so that's why this is here. I don't really have anything else to say other than this is just very unmemorable and just, again, not creative in any way. I guess he just wanted work, but, at some point, I feel like Ed could have spoken up and been like, can't we do a little better?
This was my number 8. Just because I thought there was some potential not lived up to here. Like, I kind of like the idea of Beefcake being a man without a country. He can't be with Hogan, he can't be with Sullivan. And the idea of the Man with No Name kind of plays off of all the different gimmick changes and name changes he's had. The Man with No Face, if he was ever called that, or maybe that was something that somebody threw in at some point, playing off of the Paris Hailing accent, I would guess. But I had this a little higher than you just because I think that the basic idea is interesting, but there was really no execution here. As you said, again, they didn't do anything with it creatively.
Right.
So to jump back, I'll pick up my number 9 since this was my 8. My number 9 was Brother Brutai, because this is kind of the most generic form of Brutus Beefcake. Like, if you had a video game doing a version of him that didn't have any licenses, they might call it Brother Brutai, and it would be like a generic color scheme kind of thing. See, what's interesting to me here, and why I put it over some of the others, is because I like that the idea kind of spanned 2 companies and started as a nickname. I recently watched some WrestleMania 9 lead-in stuff, and go and find the promos that Beefcake and Hogan were doing on Money Incorporated during this time. It is some of the most batshit stuff you will ever hear.
Is this the era where Hogan said brother like 25 times in one promo?
Yes, and there's a point where they have a briefcase. I don't remember why they have a briefcase, and Beefcake is wearing a face mask, and it's red and yellow. And to show how durable the face mask is, Hogan is beating him with the briefcase in the face.
Yeah, in reality, I've heard talk from some of the podcasts out there. I want to say it was Bruce Pritchard's that after Beefcake did get his surgery following that parasailing accident, from what I understand, he's like the effing Terminator, like as far as the strength in his face muscles go. Like he's like stronger now there than he ever was before. Like it would take something phenomenal to re-injure all that. But I digress.
Yes, but anyway, yes. So I like the idea that it was kind of a nickname, and again, we talk about WCW booking and creativity is going to come up a lot tonight. And when he gets to WCW, they don't know what to call him. So since Hogan's just calls him Brother Brutai, well, he's Brother Brutai until they figured out Clipmaster.
And I wonder like if WWE had not been happy with Brother Brutai, in some way. I don't know that they would have had Brother or Brutai trademarked, but I wonder why they didn't stick with that, because I had it at number 6, which is why I mentioned it. I had it a little bit higher because I didn't mind it nearly as much as some of these other weird gimmicks. It made sense. It was a vague reminder of who he was. And I thought fans probably picked that up very clearly, but then they just kind of went down the Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole after this. But yeah, Brother Brutai was what it was. I thought that they skirted enough trademark issues there, but maybe they didn't. Who knows? Eric Bischoff he wasn't the president at this point, but he hasn't gone into detail any of this. He's not a big fan of Ed Leslie. He called him a leech and stuff on many occasions. But anywho, yes, that was my number 6. But my number 8 is the various incarnations of Eddie Boulder, Dizzy Golden, Dizzy Hogan, all of those, simply because I'm going to put up a picture right now, like to see Ed Leslie at this point is like his hair and mustache are just ridiculous. I want to say that he has to have fun with this himself these days. Like he has to look back at these pictures and chuckle at himself. If he doesn't, then he's taking himself too seriously. I mean, obviously, he was always a friend of Hogan. Other YouTube videos will say he was Hogan's bitch. Like some of these names obviously say that right out loud. There wasn't really much to this character, and his promos back then were like god awful. It was basically, something to the effect of, well, when my friend Hogan shows up, he's gonna destroy you guys. Like it was just he could barely get the words out. So that was my number 8. And Leonard's number 8 was the man with no face,
man with no name, which we talked about. My 7 was the early years, various gimmicks there that we talked about. I haven't seen a lot of that. Have seen some clips, some pictures. To me, the two things you can say here, and I guess this is me looking big picture, which is why I had it higher than you, is one, why he was horrible at this time period. This is where he learned how to work and he learned the business during this period. And it was also the period where he hooked himself to Hulk Hogan. If it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, he would not have had the career he had. I don't think you can argue that. Even if he would have wound up in WWF or WCW at any point, he certainly wouldn't have got the pushes he got, and he certainly wouldn't have been there as long as he was. It was because of Hogan. So because of those two kind of bigger picture elements, I had that a little higher than you.
All right. Well, my number 7 was the Zodiac. And this gimmick came after he was the man with no name and face, he then joined the Dungeon of Doom, which was a very long storyline of Kevin Sullivan and all the post WWE guys they could muster, attempting to destroy Hulkamania with Randy Savage there as well. So he was known as the Zodiac, and his hair looked like Coolio, and he only said yes and no, and this is as goofy as it gets, which is why it's at number 7 for me and not lower. Like, this is just goofy, and I'm assuming this is the guy from the land of yin and yang, Leonard. I don't know that for a fact. I would just assume.
Yes.
I watched some promos, but yeah, the Zodiac is just, this is like, what was that Dustin Runnels gimmick where he was 7?
7. Oh yeah.
This is like in that league of gimmicks, like where it's like way after Jumping the Shark, Nuking the Fridge, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, that's my number 7.
Okay, so Zodiac is my number 5 because I had it higher because it was at least memorable.
Right.
I was watching at this period, and I thought he was Zodiac a lot longer than he was because I remember it very strongly. And I think if you asked anyone who's watching WCW at this period and you say Zodiac, they're going to remember the entrance, the yes and no, the arm movement thing he did, just the general look. They're going to remember that. So why this is completely over the top and silly, I think it's knowingly so and very memorable, and that's why I had it higher than you. But that was my 5. My number 6 is the Disciple. This is Beefcake still as Hogan's sidekick, but the dynamic had changed because they're both heels now. Honestly, I didn't know this was Beefcake at the very start when I was watching wrestling, because he had the longer hair and the beard and he wore sunglasses a lot. And I don't think it was until a point that maybe he got the sunglasses knocked off or something where I went, oh, that's Beefcake. So I think it was a good look change for him. I liked the stunner he did as a finisher, which was called the Apocalypse. I think it looked pretty good. Now, the reason I have this lower than maybe some of the others, I obviously have this lower than you have it, is because of the end of it was, one, the NWO was so bloated at this point. He gets lost. And the Disciple was the only member of the One Warrior Nation, which is a complete dumpster fire angle that we're not going to get deep into. But it doesn't certainly help the character that the Disciple was a centerpiece of the Hogan Warrior feud too. That was, so awful in and of itself. So there's a lot of the components of the Disciple I kind of like, but again, it's another example of the execution not really being good and him being involved in such terrible storylines, i.e. the One Warrior Nation.
Yeah, so I had the Disciple as my number 4 for many of the reasons that you just listed. Mm-hmm. I had no idea that this was Ed Leslie, Brutus Beefcake. I had no idea. I looked, and when I would tune into WCW at this time, I was always more of a WWF viewer, but I would tune in to WCW from time to time. And when I would see this guy with the beard, I could tell that the commentators were giving him attention, but I had no idea who it was. I thought that he had a really cool look, and the silent thing I thought really worked. And in retrospect, I think that this was one of the better gimmick changes, radical gimmick changes that Ed Leslie had throughout his career, because it was a complete 180 from anything that he had done before. He was still by Hogan's side, but almost unrecognizable. So I do think they could have done more with this gimmick than they did, or perhaps better things than what they did, as Leonard mentioned, the One Warrior Nation. Mm-hmm. But I still, overall, I thought that this was a neat idea at the time for the NWO, which, as Leonard said, was very bloated. So that would bring us to number 5, right, Leonard? What is number 5?
My number 5 was the Zodiac, which we're talking about already.
Yes, my number 5 is the Booty Man.
Okay.
So this was obviously a very goofy gimmick, but this is when I was talking earlier about the Clipmaster and how they could have really gone full tilt with it. it seemed like they did here with the Booty Man, especially Leslie himself. Like he had, Kimberly Page with him. His finishing move was the high knee, which is fantastic. And this is a guy that's obsessed with his own ass. This predates Billy Gunn.
Yes.
And Billy Gunn, I hope, bought Ed Leslie a drink at some point, because a lot of the inspiration had to have come from this. This was obviously another random goofy gimmick that he got, and he was just kind of doing a job, but it seemed like he was more committed to this one than he was with some of the ones we mentioned previously. He also looked a lot like Brutus Beefcake at this point. He wasn't trying to be anybody else, not really a heel. And as a side note, Hogan at this point called him, I guess as a spinoff, Brother Booty, which, Hogan has to tack brother onto pretty much everything. And why not this? So it's just when you call somebody your friend Brother Booty, it's just, I don't know. It just seems weird to me. I don't know. But so that is my number 5.
Well, that's going to surprise you because Booty Man's my number 3.
Wow.
Because the Booty Man is so bad, it's good. It's the Plan 9 of outer space.
That's a great way to explain it. So bad is good.
It's the Plan 9 of outer space of wrestling gimmicks for me. It's so over the top and it's so dumb, as you mentioned. I think everybody realized it. And as you said, I think Ed Leslie was committed to it. I think, and that helps. I think being added, having Kimberly Page added to him helps. She certainly had an ass for it. She's one of the best looking women ever in wrestling history. I think she got what she was supposed to do. I think they had good chemistry with each other.
Yeah.
Beefer always had cutouts in his tights, and here it's just ridiculous. He's, as you mentioned, he's in love with his own butt. He does the high knee. All of that there to me says this was a purposeful comedy gimmick. And again, I think Kimberly got it. Beefcake got it. Again, this was short-lived too. I don't think this was around that long, but I remember it. I think it's something people remember who was watching it at the time. Yeah. So because of the fun of it, I have it much higher than you. As I said, that's my number 3.
Right. And as I said earlier, my number 4 is The Disciple. Leonard, your number 4.
No, my number 4 is The Butcher. Because many people will tell you that Butcher vs. Hogan at Starrcade 94 was the worst main event of a mainstream wrestling pay-per-view ever. However, if you look at it in a vacuum, purely of Ed Leslie's career, which is kind of what we're doing here tonight, it's a high watermark. He's in the main event of the biggest pay-per-view of the year for the world title against one of the biggest wrestling stars of all time. This is his biggest singles match ever. It really is. And I think, like I mentioned earlier with a couple other things, squandered potential. Everyone has turned on Hogan except Beefcake. Then he finally does. And he becomes the Butcher. Butcher cuts meat. Barber cuts hair. There's some parallel there. To play What If, I think if Hogan and Beefcake had stayed in the WWF 94, 95, then they had to come up with something for them to do. Maybe something apart from the new generation era. I could see them doing something like this, having Beefcake turn on Hogan, becoming the Butcher, and probably doing better with it. So, I have this one pretty high because, again, in a vacuum, this is really a high point for Beefcake match-wise. Maybe not storyline-wise, but match-wise.
Yeah, I agree. And this was my number 2.
Okay.
And for the reason that you just mentioned, and a lot of people look at this main event from Starrcade 94 and roll their eyes and say, oh my gosh, how could anybody have put Ed Leslie in a main event of a Starrcade? And all that might be true. And the match is not great. It's a typical Hogan match from this era, but it was a main event of one of the biggest WCW shows of the year. And you can't take that away from him. And, his 2, title runs in his career, his major title runs, like you could argue that those are pretty much the same in terms of the impact that they left. And that's why I put it at number 2, because this was as high as it would get for him, in my opinion, aside from maybe the arguable one, which I'm sure Leonard will get to at some point here. But this was a gimmick that I do think had a lot of potential, and they could have gone better with it. And maybe giving it some flavor, some sort of spice to mix in there, something to really commit to it. But the way it was laid out with Heenan kind of declaring he just butchered a friendship, and then he's called the Butcher. Like, they could have laid it out better, and I think then they would have gotten more mileage out of it. I agree with you, though. If Hulkamania had lasted longer in the WWF, we might have seen heel run from Beefcake or Tugboat. It was rumored Tugboat was going to turn on him there leading up to WrestleMania 7, but that didn't happen. So that is my number 2. So, Leonard, your number 3.
Okay, so number 3 was the Booty Man, which we've talked about.
And my number 3 is Dream Team, Brutus Beefcake. So, as I said, my number 2 and 3, I think, are pretty close together. He was not Brutus the Barber yet, but he was in a heel tag team with Greg the Hammer Valentine, and they worked really well together. And they were the tag team champions. So, I mean, as far as tag teams go, that's where you want to be. And this really, I think, had him apart from Hogan. And so he was kind of crafting his own legacy here for a bit, which might be an argument for why it deserves to be a little bit higher than what I put it. Because this was him as his own character, doing his own thing, and they obviously had a great relationship and still do to this day, from what it seems like. And I mean, this was a great part of his career that should be maybe mentioned more often.
Well, it's my number 2 is Dream Team Brutus Beefcake. I almost put it number 1, to be honest with you. I really debated that because a lot of the things you mentioned, he's kind of away from Hogan. He's doing his own thing, but he's got a huge spotlight in the WWF. And he's put in a tag team with a great veteran worker in Greg the Hammer Valentine to work with and to learn from. He's also given a veteran manager in Johnny Valiant, which is very important to mention as well. He had a tag team run. He didn't have to do any really heavy lifting here, but he held up his end of the team. Got a push, big win, tag champs. This is, I think, a real pinnacle for him. Again, still young, but had been in the business 7 years, had started to not only figure himself out, but again, the fact that he gets surrounded by these 2 veterans in Valiant and Valentine, I think really helped him to develop more. And this version also worked the very first ever WrestleMania against David Sammartino. So I think that also says that WWF was high on him, whether that was Hogan talking him up. But I think that they were high on him, and I think they wanted to give him opportunities. And I think that when you look at the opportunity he had here, it was one where he was protected and given time to develop. If you go back and you look, a lot of times you have tag teams where one of the guys really breaks out as a single. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact of them using a tag team as a kind of a proving ground for some guys. Greg Valentine already established himself as a singles, and he would again. I think this is just a great era for him as a developing wrestler.
Right. And this was him kind of building his foundation. And that would bring us to our number 1 pick, which Leonard and I, it seems like,
we agree,
both have the same, which is obvious, and that would be Brutus the Barber Beefcake. And I'll just say, like, looking back now, like, my view of Ed Leslie now might be a little bit tarnished simply because of some of the public issues that he and Hogan have had, and how his career has kind of been just basically being a glue to Hogan for so long. But back in the 80s and early 90s, I was a huge Brutus Beefcake fan. I had I think he had a foam pair of scissors or something to that effect, or toy scissors of some kind.
Something of that nature. I don't remember exactly, but there was some sort of replica of the shears that he would carry to the ring.
Right. And I mean, his LJN figure was actually just the Brutus Beefcake look. It wasn't necessarily the Barber, I don't think. But I was a big fan of his. I thought that he and Hogan had the best chemistry during this era. They worked well together. Me being a huge Hulk Hogan fan. Whenever Brutus would come out to save the day, it would always make me get up and cheer as a little kid. He would have some good feuds. I would say his best feud would be with maybe $1 Million Man. That's the one I remember the most. He had other good feuds though, as well. And yeah, I mean, this is just the gimmick that everybody knows him as. It's weird for me to keep calling him Ed Leslie because everybody just knows him as Brutus, the Barber Beefcake. That's what you think of when you see his face, not necessarily Ed Leslie. But yeah, this was him at his peak. He didn't really have any title runs, but he didn't really need it, I would argue. But Leonard, what do you have to say about
I would say maybe not even very arguably, I would say that Beefcake was probably the number 3 face for the WWF from 87 to 90 behind Hogan and Savage.
Right.
He was poised for an IC title run from what I know prior to the parasailing accident, that he was going to take the belt off of the Honky Tonk Man, but that wound up going to the Ultimate Warrior, and how that went from there. A great visual when he would come out with the shredded barber's coat and he's got the big, pruning shears with the red and white tape on them. I think that's really cool. The fact that he would put jobbers out with a sleeper hold and then cut their hair.
It's such a bat shit gimmick, but it worked.
Yeah, it worked. It's so memorable and it's so over the top and cartoony, which is great for that rock and wrestling era. And again, you had so many, top level heels that again, the feud with $1 Million Man's very memorable. And one thing was he didn't want to get his hair cut, and how the heels would kind of squirm out at getting their hair cut, or how he would. I want to say, I think it was Boris Zukov that he wrestled, who's bald, and he wound up like cutting his goatee or something.
Yeah, I do remember that now.
Yeah, a jokey stuff like that. But it was, again, the thing that everyone remembers him for to this day. I did wind up watching a clip from the memorabilia show that was on A&E where they're going out and they're finding memorabilia. And they do talk to Bruce Beefcake at one point. And they're trying to find a pair of his shears. They're not trying to find Booty Man tights or the Zodiac makeup. They're trying to find shears. So I think
Zodiac makeup would be fantastic.
Yes. So I think that says a lot. But they were also looking for a Greg Valentine robe, and they were talking about the Dream Team era as well. So, but of course, those are both WWF era gimmicks. But yeah, I don't think you can say more than what we've said. We can continue to compound it. Just the idea that Bruce Barber Beefcake is what everyone remembers, and throughout his career, by a lot of these gimmicks, they try to recapture that magic. Brother Brutai, Clipmaster, even the Booty Man to a degree, trying to take elements of what made the Barber so great and to repeat those.
Right. And, I will say that another good feud of his was the one with Mr. Perfect, and he famously ended Mr. Perfect's undefeated streak. And another memorable cut that he had was him cutting the Genius's hair.
Yes.
That was a memorable feud as well. And, so that means we think the Barber gimmick was his best gimmick. If you disagree with us, let us know. If you think we should have incorporated some of the other minor gimmicks, let us know. Or maybe Dizzy Golden should have been its own, apart from Dizzy Hogan or
just
Ed
the
Hogan.
early years gimmicks. Yes, I think we were pretty close. Although the closer we got to the top, the more we seemed to be off. So
like the bottom of our list was the same, the top of our list was the same, but in the middle there, we moved things around in a little different ways. But yeah, I mean, I think that, despite what he is behind the scenes, he left his legacy on the wrestling business. He has run the gamut. He had gimmick that was really great. He had a bunch of gimmicks that weren't, but I do think that fans will always remember who he is. And nobody else has a look like him. So on that note, I think that he left enough of a positive legacy. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely so. I think people have a warm remembrance of him. especially fans of our era from that time period. And I'm not going to go into everything that he's got going on today. I have met him in person. I've seen him at various shows. You know, and he's been fine. And I do think that as time goes on, some of the lesser gimmicks and things about him drop away, and people just have the warm memories of the Barber. And so let that be it. Now, one thing I also did want to mention is that there's a card game I think I introduced you to called 80s Mania Wrestling Returns. It's a card game. You collect cards. You use that to make rosters with. And they do have a Bruce Beefcake inspired card, if you can see it there on my phone. It's a little glary, but it's called Stud Muffin. And instead of the barber shop, he has an interview segment called The Bakery.
Yeah.
And his main feud is with Mr. Tycoon, who is the Ted DiBiase, copy in this game. And I don't know if he has a tag team with the Hogan one. I'd have to look that up. But the Hogan character is known as Dude Brohan, which I think is a great name for that character.
Yeah, we love 80s Mania Wrestling Returns, and modern Mania Wrestling as well, I think, is very good. Very cool games. The 80s one, they really do create some clever knockoffs of some of our favorites from that era.
Yeah, that's why I usually play that one a little bit more. And hey, 80s Mania Wrestling guys, give us a sponsorship.
There you go. Hey, we'll plug you as much as you want. So let us know what you think of Ed Leslie and his various gimmicks. Another YouTube video said that he think in total it was 18. So that's a lot of gimmicks. And
yeah, and a lot of them was maybe very short-lived. And of course, if you count all those early name changes, yeah, you could probably get to 18.
Yeah.
And I have a thought. This is not, again, for next show, but in the future, we do this again. I think we should do Steve Lombardi.
I'm up for that. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, until next time, please let us know what you think in the comments. Check out us on Apple Podcasts and or Spotify if you'd rather listen to us. Click the like button on this YouTube video and subscribe to our channel. Every little bit helps. And Alexa will see you out.